Hello and welcome to the Gemhawks YouTube channel. For today's video we're going to focus on some simple celestial designs. Now these are a request from one of my regular viewers to create moon and star earrings. Now these can be sized up or down for charms or pendants. You can wear them long on chain scraps. You can counterbalance them with bead stacks, these beautiful beads from Fleur at Relax and Craft, or you can keep it super simple. Each piece takes only one piece of wire. The star takes between 6 and 8 inches and the moon takes between 5 and 6 inches. You don't have to have the counterbalance or bead stacks, you can just keep it simple if you prefer. We're going to begin with the star shape. Now I'm going to use a square multi-step mandrel. This was again from Fleur at Relax and Craft in one of her subscription boxes. If you are making them as earrings, you'll need to remember which step you started on. I'm going to begin with a just shy of right angle, around about 2 inches from one end. So it's about 45 degrees. And then what I'm going to do is to go for 5 folds around the set step. Now, because it's me, I can't actually remember what number step I used to create the star just here, so we'll wing it. So what we're going to do is to bring the wire around, so we've got 2 sides, 3 sides, 4 sides and 5 sides. And then I'm just going to put a little bit of an angle change on the end as well. So if I remove the mandrel. Now this creates a weird looking square with dodgy looking antennas and the corners are quite soft. So the first thing that we will do is firm up those corners. I'm going to very gently open out this springy little form and pop my fine tipped pliers into those corners and just open and close them 2 or 3 times to get a slightly firmer corner in that little square shape. So you're just going to do that in each one of them. If you don't have a square mandrel or a square form, you can absolutely just take a ruler and measure that distance, which is around about 1 inch. So I began with around about 7.5 to 8 inches of wire, which gives me plenty to have 1 inch sides on this star design. If you want something much larger, then you just size up and add a bit. So give that a bit of a wiggle. If you imagine that each side of the star is going to be 1 inch and we need a couple of inches on one end and an inch on the other end, then 8 inches is perfect because we've got those 5 sides. But you can play around with the size and the design as you wish. Now I've left that last one quite soft because I don't want to overly stress that out yet, because I will be making that wrap around the upright. So once we've firmed up those corners or 90-degree angles, I'm just going to give that a quick straighten. And then I'm going to start with the long tail, and I'm going to come to the first angle change after the long tail. If I pop my pliers in and just fold that up so that it's about half of the distance that it was before. So where it was a 90-degree angle inside before, now it's a 45-degree angle, and that will enable us to see the 5-sided star build up really nicely. You absolutely will be able to change that angle as you move through the design, so don't worry if it's too tight or too loose, you can alter that. And I'm just going to continue moving on around, and you'll see that very, very quickly that star forms without too much hassle at all. So you can sometimes just get those angles muddled, so just take your time, give that a bit of a wiggle, and you'll find that it turns into that 5-sided star really easily. So once you've got the star form in position, we're going to now take a look at that last soft angle change. I'm going to grip across and then give it a bit of a push, so it's a slightly tighter angle now. And you can see that we've got the angle change just behind. I'm going to grip directly across that angle change and support it whilst I bring the shorter tail of wire around the longer tail of wire at the top. And in that way, we're keeping the length of the sides. If you don't put that little bend in, it's very easy to take all of this wire, put it into the wrap around that central line, and then you end up with one side much, much shorter. So once you've got that little angle change starting to wrap around the upright, you can then switch your grip to support across the 2 upmost parts of the design. and push that tail of wire around the neck. Now I'm working with quite an old wire. It's also quite cold, so it's not super flexible. So I'm just going to pinch that down so that that first wrap sits right at the top of that little star shape. So we've kind of set that, but you can see that there's a bit of a deviation. That's absolutely fine. You've got lots of flexibility to just change that. Now I'm going to go for 3 wraps around the upright, and I'm pinching quite firmly across these 2 wires to prevent drawing this side up and around that neckline section. So the wrap is a little bit loose because again it's old wire that I've had for well over a decade. I'm just going to pinch that up neatly, try to get it straight, and then decide which side I want to have as the rear of the design, and that is where I will cut away the wire. Got a new lamp on the table today and I just sent it flying. So once I've cut that away, I'm just going to give it a quick smooth and squish to make it neat and tidy. Again, focusing on not drawing any of this wire into that spiral. Let's give it a little bit of a tighten up. Make sure that you're happy with that little stack of wraps. Now you don't have to have a bead. You can have a bead, you can add into chain, you can counterbalance it, you can have them the same length, you can have single bits of chain, whatever makes you happy. I've just got some random beads here, so let's see if I can find a matching pair. There's a pair of gold ones. So I'll put one up at the top of the neckline just here. And then I'm going to create a simple loop above that. One of the reasons I use simple loops in my earring designs is that I would rather the earring gave way than the ear hole in my lobe. You could, of course, absolutely create a wrapped loop if you prefer. I'm going to use my memory wire finishing pliers today to create a small loop up at the top. Draw that wire all the way around, make sure that that's centralised, and then trim away at the back. So let's just trim that at the crossover point. And then you can use your flat facing pliers to just strengthen that loop and make sure that the cut end sits on the angle change at the top of the bead if you're using one. So there's the little star. Now it does look a little bit on the wonk, so take your time. It's very easy to just get in there and refine those angles if you need to. You can even pinch them up if you want a slightly tighter, tauter looking star. Just take your time and you will find that you can create that star to have the aesthetic that you're after. So that is how you create the star in today's celestial earring design. To create the moon charm or earring design on today's celestial inspired designs, we're going to use a 6-inch length of that 1mm or 18 gauge wire. Around about 1.5 inches from the end, I'm just going to turn a soft angle to get us started, and then I'm going to make sure that I put some warmth into this before we go any further. So once that's nice and toasty, I'm going to sharpen up that angle slightly, and a tiny bit from the end I'm just going to make the top horn of the moon. Now this can be obviously whatever size and shape that you like, but this is the section we're creating to begin with. So I'm going to just sharpen that slightly. You can sharpen it after the fact if you prefer. Once I've got that sharpened, I'm going to use a round mandrel. Now if you have a very tapered ring mandrel, you could use that. However, I've got some beautiful beadalon wooden mandrels that I'm going to use today. To generate the smaller size, the inside of the crescent on that moon, the mandrel I'm using is going to be the 0.25 of an inch, which is 6.3 millimeters. It's kind of far away today. So that's like a very slender pencil, something like an eyeliner pencil if you have access to one of those. And what we're going to do is to use that just to create the inside of that crescent moon. So just fold that around and you can bring that wire back towards itself, and you can decide how big a dip you want in the middle of your moon. And then we're going to bring that wire back again in the opposite direction on the outside of that form. Now what I'm going to do here is just to bring the wire down and away slightly, so it's coming away sideways. And in that way you can pop the end of your round form, and this is more like a marker pen size. This is the 0.5 of an inch, 12.7 millimeters apparently. More like a marker pen, that one, or a lip gloss I suppose. And then I'm going to bring that to sit up across that straight up tail at the top of the design. Now again, you can just play around with this until it sits how you want it to. You can flatten it down, you can bring it slightly tighter if you want to. Let's have a look at this side. So you can face the moon whichever way means something to you. But again, what we're going to do is to grip across this tail of wire where it crosses over that first angle change, push the wire over the back and around the upright. And in that way, we're kind of setting the size of the design to begin with. Now I'm just going to pinch this and then give it a little bit of a squidge to encourage it to sit really tightly against that angle change. Once that's sitting where I want it to, I'm going to grip across both of those pieces of wire and draw the tail around. And I'm going to try to match the star, because whilst I've got 2 stars and 2 moons, I'm going to wear them as a star and a moon on each pair of earrings. So draw that tail all the way around until you have the same number of wraps as you do on your first piece. And then you can decide which way you want your moon to face, because that will mean if you're having it facing that way, you've already got 3 wraps, but if you've got it facing that way, you've only got 2.5. So I'm going to turn it to face this way. That is my preference. Take that tail all the way around to the back of the design, and then we're going to trim that away and smooth it down. So let's get that in the scrap pot and then tidy up that last little cut end of wire. So smooth that down nice and firmly, and then get that little stack of coils really neatly and into position. So I'm just going to make sure that's nice and straight. Once you're happy that that's all sitting how it ought to be sitting, I'm going to add on a bead. You absolutely don't have to have a bead. You could go directly into a piece of chain, as I have done with the demonstration pieces. So what I'm going to do now is to draw that wire over to one side, use the small pin, which is a 2mm pin on my memory wire finishing pliers, and take that tail all the way around, and then trim off exactly the same way as we did before, at the point at which the angle change occurs at the top of the bead. So you will need to ensure that the cut end of wire meets that angle change, and then give it a smush to make it nice and firm. And then you can either add directly into ear wires, you can use them as charms. If you are going to use them as charms, I would very much recommend having a little more wire and going for a wrapped loop rather than a simple loop, but I have explained why I prefer to have simple loops on my earrings. So let's just change how that sits so that it's a little bit neater at the top. There we go, that's better. So you can take a little more time than I have to generate your celestial inspired earrings or charms or pendants. I hope that you've enjoyed today's tutorial. My name is Gem and this is the Gem Hawks YouTube channel.